we see this all the time. So can you tell me a little bit more about the proposal and the project details?
I can, and that's what I'm here to do. But before we go there, I think one of the things that's important to understand is how we got here.
Okay,
and
fair
we should
enough.
probably talk about that first.
Fair enough. So how did our roads and ditches get to be such terrible conditions?
Okay, so why haven't we maintained our roads like we used to do 25, 30 years ago? And the answer to that is really simple, and it's one word: it's money.
Always, it's always money.
We don't have the money to do that kind of maintenance. City revenues are down, and it's not just Lathrup Village, it's all municipalities in the state have seen dramatic revenue cuts, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the one thing I do want to make clear is, people send their check, they write their check out to, their tax check to Lathrup Village, and we get the money, and they have this misconception that, okay, the city has this big pot of money, and they're just spending it here or there, there's no oversight. I mean, people typically think of government that way. And I can tell you, for firsthand, that our city administrator and our treasurer are hawks in watching our money,
Yes,
and they pinch every penny they can out of every dollar that they receive. So it's not an issue of any type of mismanagement. It's simply an issue of revenue. So municipalities across the state, for a variety of reasons, have much less revenue than they used to have. And so there are really four main reasons. One is the 2008 housing crash. And you may think, all right, well, it's 2019, so that was 11 years ago.
Yeah.
Why is that still an issue? And we can talk about that. The second issue is reduced state revenue sharing. And then the third and the fourth issue are both Headley and Proposition A.
Well, and those are all really tied together. So can you explain how some of these events and laws caused that reduction in revenue to the city?
Sure. So let's start with Proposition A. So Proposition A was a voter-led initiative in 1994. And basically, what it was meant to rein in property value growth. So property taxes stayed in line. And basically what it does is it limits the individual taxable value growth of a home to the lesser of inflation, or 5%. So what that means, by example, let's say, for example, this year property values go up by 15%. Your taxable value will only go up a maximum of 5%. So the idea was to keep taxable values from dramatically rising, and it did a great job of that. But there was an unintended effect, and that was the proposition assumed that there would be constant growth. And we know that didn't happen. In 2008, we had the real estate crash, so property values tanked. And so from 2007, when we were at our revenue high point, then we had the crash in 2008, and property values continued to fall all the way to 2014 before they started to rise again. So in that period from 2007 to 2014, the city lost $75 million in taxable value.
Wow.
So if you think about how small we are,
That's huge.
and it's a huge reduction. So, and what that really equates to is a 40% reduction in revenue for the city. And actually, our auditors I've heard them quote closer to 50%. They probably have better numbers than I had when I was putting together the presentation, but a 40 to 50% cut in revenue. And unfortunately, while that cut can happen very fast, the return can't happen very fast, because we just talked about Proposal A, and property values can only go up a maximum of 5% per year. So if we made an incredibly unrealistic assumption that property values are going to go up 5+% every year from here on out, it will still take to 2027 before we get back to our 2007 revenue levels.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and actually our auditors, using more realistic
Sure.
assumptions, say that it's going to be to probably the early 2030s till we get back to the 2007 revenue levels. So I actually take my hat off to the city councils and the city administrators and treasurer that we had during that period, because they did a great job of maintaining services, given that they had half the revenue that they had before. So when I talk about this, I typically throw the example out there. Imagine you go to work tomorrow and your boss tells you, all right, we're cutting your salary by 50%, and that's going to stay for 15 years.
I think I would cry.
Right.
I think I would cry.
So, but then you go home and you tell your family, and your family says, okay, we understand that, but we want everything to remain the same. We want just as much food, we want running water, we want our roof not to leak. Well, obviously, something's got to give, and that's what's happened with the cities. We haven't had the money for all these years, and we're at the point where something had to give, and what gave for the cities was infrastructure spending. So we didn't have the money to spend on the roads. So the combination of Proposal A, along with the housing crash, the real estate crash, is what put us in this situation where our roads have degraded and have really decayed very quickly.
Well, that sure explains why the city has had so little money for the roads. You mentioned there were some other factors. Would you like to talk about those?
Yeah, so there's a couple other factors that come into play as well. One is the Headley Amendment in 1978. So that was the state legislature enacted this law in 1978, and what it was designed to do was to rein in the amount of revenue that cities receive. And basically what it does, it says that when in any year where the collective taxable value of the city increases, the city has to lower its chartered millage rate so that it gets no more revenue than it got the prior year with a small adjustment for inflation. So as an example, and this is an oversimplified example, but it's very illustrative of what I just said. So let's say, for example, the overall taxable value across all properties in Lathrup Village was $1 million. And the millage rate was only 1 mil. Wouldn't that be nice?
Yes.
But that 1 mil will actually generate $1,000 of revenue for the city to spend. Okay, but let's say in year 2 here, the taxable value of all the homes and properties in Lathrup rises and goes to 1.1 million. So what the Headley Amendment does is it says that we have to lower our chartered millage rate, lower it down so residents are paying less, so that we only get that same $1,000. So your millage rate is always going to fall over time. So what you can't do, unfortunately, is like when we had the housing crash and property values tanked, you don't get to raise your millage rate back up. So the millage rate is always going to fall over time. And so what happened in Lathrup is our chartered millage rate is 20 mils.
Okay.
And over time, it kept falling and falling and falling. And by the time we got to 2010, our millage rate was 25% lower. It was 16 mils.
Wow.
And so in 2010, what the residents did is they passed via vote what's called a Headley override, and they said, which basically says, it tells the city, all right, we know we're supposed to be at 20, we're at 16 right now, you can go ahead and put it back at 20.
Okay.
So in 2010, we put it back to 20, and property values still continued to fall until 2014, and then in 2014, they started to rise back up again. So the millage rate started to fall again, and they've been rising, and so the millage rate keeps falling. So right now, we're actually at 18.5 mils, so relative to our chartered maximum of 20. So for a city to make more money or to have more revenue, the only way they can do that is to build more buildings, more homes, more businesses. But if you're like Lathrup, you have no land and you're built out. I mean, you know that, you're the economic developer.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, so there's no way of getting more revenue. So the way this kind of affects the roads, if you think about the average home in Lathrup, so the average home across Lathrup has a taxable value of $67,000. And so since 2003, when we authorized the millage rate to be 20 mils as a city, if you look at, the residents have essentially been undertaxed.
Okay.
Because relative to the charter,
Okay.
because the millage rates keep falling and we're supposed to be paying 20 mils. So if you look at that and add up that difference, essentially since 2003, the average homeowner has saved or been undertaxed by about $3,000. And if you multiply that times the number of homes in Lathrup, you're now talking $5 million. That's a quarter of the cost of this whole project that we're proposing. So again, the Headley Amendment has had a big effect on the city's ability to garner money to put on the roads.
Wow. That's...
Yeah. And then there's one more.
Oh, there's more.
One more. There's more. So the other and last factor that causes the revenue to go, overall revenue of the municipalities to go down is state shared revenue. So what the state of Michigan has done is they've essentially balanced their budget on the backs of the municipalities by not providing them the full shared revenue that they're supposed to via the state constitution.
Lucky yes.
Yeah. And so Lathrup Village now gets about $200,000 less per year than they used to get. And according to the Michigan Municipal League, since 2002, the city's lost almost $2 million in revenue. So again, when you talk about roads, in terms of rehabilitating roadway, that's about 4 miles of road. So you can see all these different factors are taking away from our ability to pave our roads. And this here is just a chart that shows how the state shared revenue has kind of bounced around from year to year. Back in the 90s, it was up about $600,000. You can see here in 2000 it was about a little over $500,000. Now we're down here somewhere around $300,000, a little over $300,000. So it's about $200,000 per year. You can see the average just showing the overall decline from year to year. And what's really interesting is this particular slide here shows the growth in municipal revenue from state sources over a 10-year period. So this is showing for all the states, how much money are the states giving their cities? And you can see from all the different states here, you've got big increases, and probably averaging about 50% across the states. But then you see these ones in red out here. There's 4 states that actually are have been given less money to their cities over that 10-year period. And Michigan is this one all the way out here on the right. We've actually given 60% less money over that 10-year period to the individual municipalities. So,
God, that makes me sad.
Yeah, so you can see Lathrup doesn't have the income that it had 30 years ago or even 10 years ago. So there's no magic bag of money that's going to get us out of this situation. There's no federal grants for local roads or state grants. The only way that we're going to solve this issue is if we as a community decide that we want to do something about it, and that's what we're attempting to do here with this proposal, to give the community an opportunity to vote on a proposal to say, you know, we understand what's happening and we know it needs to be fixed, and so we're going to pony up and support the fix. So that's what the election's about.
Wow, I mean, that all makes sense, and it's, gosh, the deck is stacked against us. I feel like so. But Lathrup Village residents already pay such high taxes.
Yeah.
So.
Yep, so we do. I'm a Lathrup Village resident. All the rest of the city council are Lathrup Village residents. We know. We write the same checks that the residents write out, and we do pay a lot in taxes. And what's interesting, or I should say what the misconception is about the taxes that we pay is people sit down twice a year and they write out a check to the city of Lathrup Village. But what they don't realize is that for general operating purposes, the city gets very little of that money that they write the check out for. So this slide here is really meant to show where that money goes. So right now, our overall millage rate is about 56 mils. And you can see when you write that check out to Lathrup, about 50% of that money goes right to Lansing to support the schools.
Okay.
So half that money is gone. 8% goes to the county. 3% goes to Oakland Community College, 2% goes to the region, so that's the Detroit Zoo, the DIA, and the Smart Bus system.
Okay.
5% is used for trash and recycling, 2% goes to the library, and the remaining piece here, this 31%, is the general operating revenue that Lathrup gets. So Lathrup gets to keep less than 1/3 of the check that you send, or the residents send, for operating purposes. And what you can see is I actually broke out, after the city has spent 29% of that money, there's 2% left for the streets.
Oh my gosh.
So very little for the streets. And what's interesting is I took my taxes. So I paid about $3,600 in taxes last year and said, where did those dollars go dollar by dollar? Okay. So you can see here, about $1,700, about half of it went up for the schools, $287 for the county. Only $1,000 of the 36, or actually $1,100 if you add the 85 for the streets. About $1,100 of the $3,600 that I spent were used by the city of Lathrop for general operating. So very little.
That's laughable.
And well, what's laughable is the $85 here that was spent on the streets. So you know, that is in a nutshell is the explanation of why we can only do 0.4 miles of road a year, because we're not getting the money. I mean, the $85 barely covers the ability to seal one crack.
I was gonna say stripe a spot, but same difference, really.
Exactly. And so you can see that only about 1/3 of what you send to Lathrop stays here for general operating purposes. So then that begs the question, so once Lathrop gets that third, what do they do with it?
Yeah.
So this is showing what Lathrop does with that 1/3 of your check that they receive. And so right off the bat, again, you'll see there's a 50% chunk that's taken out, and that's for public safety, for police and fire. Okay. And that's fairly typical. That percentage is pretty consistent with other communities. So that leaves 50%, the other 50% of the 1/3, so for general operating. So essentially what that means is about 1/6, or about 16% of the check that you send to Lathrup is actually used for general operating, which includes the roads.
Wow.
And again, what I did here is I showed how do my dollars break out. So I paid $3,600.
Okay.
Lathrop got about $1,400. And so where did those dollars go? So again, about half of them went to the school, or to the public safety. And then you can see the rest of it, the other half was for general operating, which includes a capital fund for the streets. Now that $95 that went into the capital fund, that's not just streets though. That's all our needs. That's water mains. That's furniture for the city hall that we're sitting in right now. It's playground equipment. It's any type of capital equipment. Okay. So it's very little money, for the streets. And then this last slide here, the League of Women Voters was here last week doing a presentation on what's being talked about at the state level for the major roads. And it was very interesting because Dr. Fisher, who's an economist at MSU, put this slide up here that actually counters the argument that people think we pay so much more than we used to.
Right.
And what this shows is all taxes, so not just property taxes, but sales tax and all taxes that a person pays out in a given year as a percentage of their personal income. And so you can see back here in the early 80s, we were paying about 12% of our income as taxes, and actually now it's down to roughly about 9%. So we do pay a lot of taxes. It is a little bit less than percentage-wise than what we used to, but
that's where we're at.
Yeah,
huh?
that's where we're at. So.
That was a really good explanation. I really appreciate how you broke down the numbers. I think that's super helpful.